I am so excited for Tom to be here tonight. I love this memoir so much, and I just wanted to start where it begins with you. You have been abruptly fired by Sumner Redstone. You're leaving your job and you're walking out, and tell us about what happened at that moment. Yours is not on either. Try again, on and off. It is unplugged. Good point.
Okay.
There you go.
All right. Yeah, I got fired on Labor Day, and I had been at this company for 26 years. And Sumner Redstone had been my boss. He was sort of a cantankerous billionaire who liked to fire CEOs on holiday weekends. My prior to bosses had been fired on 4th of July and Memorial Day. So you kind of could see it coming. But I got fired, and I hadn't seen this coming because I thought, well, I was doing a good job. But, you know, if you work at a place long enough, your radar can dim. Anyway, I was in my office for the last time filling up a banker's box with photos and this and that. You see that all the time now. People are leaving their offices with banker's boxes full of things. So I just wanted to sneak out, you know, and have nobody see me. I was a bit embarrassed and I was humiliated. And I said goodbye to my assistant. I got in the elevator. And when I got down to the ground floor, I was on the 52nd floor. I got out, there was this people there. I thought it was a fire drill or something, but it was a flash mob to wish me goodbye. And they were chanting my name, like 1,000 people. And this is on 1515 Broadway in the middle of Times Square. So I was stunned. I mean, I was really stunned. I was hoping to sneak out, no one would see me. And here I was being feted by everybody, and they really loved me. And I go, my God, I'm saying, these people I've worked with all these years, I'm saying goodbye to them. This is it. This is the last time I'm going to walk through here. And it was something. I got you had to go down an escalator to get to the ground floor. So I went out into the street with my little banker's box. I had a chainsaw. Somebody give me a chainsaw. I thought that was
It was
worth
a band
keeping.
member gave you a chainsaw.
The band Anthrax.
Yeah,
for you heavy
sorry,
metal-
that's a key detail.
for you heavy metal fans out there. And I got a taxi and threw my stuff in, and then I looked back, and people were on the sidewalk chanting my name as I drove off. It was a fond farewell.
Well, I love that story. I think it just says so much to who you were as a boss. But let's rewind. You did grow up in Rowayton, Connecticut. You went to college and business school on the East Coast. You get a job in advertising. You abruptly decide to quit and travel to the Sahara. Like, what happened?
Well, you missed a piece, because when I got out of graduate school, I took a year off and went bartending.
All right, what I tried to just go, there's so much in this book.
I hit all these resort towns. I hit Aspen and San Francisco and Martha's Vineyard and St. Thomas. It was a great year. And then I got a job in an ad agency. And it was a top 10 ad agency. I was ripe for the job. They put me in the fast track. My first account was G.I. Joe, which this is the height of the Vietnam War. And I'm sort of an anti-war guy. And now we had to change G.I. Joe because he was going out of favor into an action man. So we gave him an honorary discharge, and he would go out looking for mummies or save people for things that were happening in outer space. But then they assigned me to mouthwash account, shampoo account. They came and told me one day, you know, we really like you, and we would like you to work on Charmin toilet paper. That was deflating, and this was, they gave me a bunch of research to take home for the weekend. They said, yeah, we really want you. You should look through the research. And in the research, I curled up on a Saturday and read it. It was in January. And they had, as Procter & Gamble could only do, they had divided America into 3 classifications of toilet paper users: rollers, folders, and crumplers. And then they had psychological profiles for each of these groups. You know, I have a sense there's a lot of crumplers in the crowd here. But it turned out that the crumplers were the target. They were the heavy users. They went to the bathroom more frequently, and they used more toilet paper every time they went. And they lived in cities. They lived in cities, so they were easy to target. So that was like, okay. I went to Central Park. I said, I don't know. And then I had this former girlfriend who was living in Paris, and she called me up to say hello, and how you doing? And I said, well, I just got to sign this toilet paper account. I'm not really too excited about it. And she says, oh man, you can't sell toilet paper. That's beneath your position in life. You should quit your job and come with me. I'm going to cross the Sahara Desert. I'm going to go down through France and Spain and Morocco, and come with me. We'll cross the Sahara Desert. Maybe we end up in the Canary Islands or something. I was on a plane like 8 days later. It was like the best decision I ever made in my life. We were together for 2 months. It was great. Went across the desert, had some adventures there. She had to go back for a teaching job, but I stayed for like a year and went everywhere, hitchhiked everywhere. And I met a woman I met a girl in Greece. She said, you should go to India. And I ended up going to India and Afghanistan. I went there and fell in love with it, started a business. I stayed there for 8 years.
So you're living in between India and Afghanistan. What was the learning curve in terms of starting a business?
It was steep.
I would assume so.
They didn't have, first of all, there was almost no foreigners there in those days. India would hit you over the head. It was like 60% of the people were under the poverty line. I thought it was crowded. It was 550 million people. Now it's 1.4 billion. But I thought it was crowded then. And, it's kind of humbling. And it was very bureaucratic. They were just 20 years or so into their independence, and they had a very distrust of foreigners, very bureaucratic. Everything took a long time, but I found partners in both countries who were trustworthy and wanted to build a business together. And I had seen all this flood of imports from Morocco and India that were cheap, and I thought, maybe what if I could do it better? Air freight was just beginning. What if I hired a designer and we could make higher quality things and sell to better stores? You could make something for $5 in New Delhi and sell it in New York a day later for $25. So I started this company with a partner, a friend of mine, and we did it for about 7 or 8 years, and we would sell to better stores. We'd be in Vogue and Mademoiselle, get all kinds of editorial coverage, and lo and behold, I became a millionaire in my 20s. And my parents were astounded because they were beginning to lose faith in me as just some distant wanderer. And I had the greatest time. I had a house in New Delhi. I lived like a pasha. My main reason was I just wanted to be there so I could travel around, which I was really able to do. So it was all fine and good, but then after about 8 years, the Russians invaded Afghanistan, and Afghanistan decided to go communist, the last country in the world to try that, by the way. And I had to beat it out of there. And then in India, Jimmy Carter, basically, after surviving everything, cobras, rodents, heat waves, strikes, you can't believe it, he declared that there'd be an embargo on imports from India, so you couldn't import anything anymore. So I went bankrupt and came back to New York deep in debt and started all over again.
All right, well, that's where things got dark. And he had to decide, he had to look for a job. He's back on the East Coast where he didn't want to be, and you see an ad you decided actually that you wanted to be at a company that was a startup, so there was somewhere to go. And you see an ad for a company called MTV.
Well,
but you had no experience whatsoever.
No, I had no experience in television. I mean, they didn't even have television where I had been living.
And that was one of your selling points to get the job.
They were looking for people with no experience in television. But it wasn't an ad. It was an interview with this guy who really came up with the idea of MTV, John Lack. It was in Billboard magazine. Part of this interview was, I'm going to start a video music channel. This is the early days of cable. It's 1980. And the only thing around of any significance then was home box office. But it was CNN, ESPN, USA Network. We were all sort of the early movers in cable. And I read this interview that he was going to start a video music channel taking music videos, which most Americans knew nothing about. They were things that Europeans did. And it was just sort of a playful new kind of medium. And I thought it was one of the greatest ideas in the world. And I went in to sell. I sold myself hard. I said, you need entrepreneurs. I know business. I know marketing. I showed him this portfolio of all this editorial coverage I had from my company. I had worked in an ad agency and everything, and I love music, and I wanted to do this. So they offered me a job right on the spot. And, you know, people talk about good luck. And, you know, all of you have been the beneficiary of loser because of good luck, but timing is really more important than luck in a way, because if it had been a week earlier or a week later, they wouldn't have been hiring anybody. They said, we want to hire 25 people this week and get going.
So what was the early days of MTV? What was the culture like?
It was wild.
Yes, it sounds wild.
It was so much fun. I mean, everyone who worked there, none of us were making any money. I was getting $35,000 a year. I was the highest paid guy. There were 6 or 7 of us. It was sort of like we were stuck in a hotel room with a few phones that had coal waiting, eating pizzas, hoping lightning would strike. We had no money to really do anything, but everybody was a music fanatic. I was almost the only guy who had finished college, let alone gone to graduate school. Everybody was out of the music business or the radio business, and really, we were like crusaders for this idea. All of us thought this is one of the best ideas in history. We're going to give everything for it. So it was fun. I mean, it was a all-consuming lifestyle.
But to get it going was hard, because it sounds like on the East Coast, they were not able. The cable started in the
Yeah, there wasn't a lot of
Midwest.
cable.
Exactly.
Everywhere we went, nobody thought it was a good idea. The music companies thought, no one's going to watch music videos. No one thought anyone's going to watch music on television. The cable operators didn't want to carry us. The advertisers thought we'd never get any audience that they would want to advertise to. So it was always a question of fighting and overcoming a no. But gradually we broke through.
And partly it was the I Want Your MTV campaign that really got it going. So tell us how that came about.
Well, early on, there was no cable really in East Coast or West Coast or any cities. The cable had really been a rural phenomenon, so there was a lot of it in the Midwest. And when we started, we only had 2 million subscribers, but they were in places like Tulsa, Oklahoma, or Wichita, or Des Moines. And I was the marketing guy, so I got to go to these towns. And because no one who worked at MTV actually got it at home, we were making something that was sort of an abstraction. We were just making it, and we shot up to a satellite, and so no one really saw what it was like in real life. So I went with this friend, John Sykes. He was my partner in crime. We went to Tulsa. I'll never always forget, we went to rent a car, and I had an MTV button on. John was the promotion guy. He made a lot of buttons. And the woman at the counter goes, "Where did you get that?" And he go, "Well, we from MTV. We work at MTV." And she goes, "You work at MTV?" And this was like a eureka moment. They'd seen MTV. It had been in their town for a month. It had just come in unannounced, and all of a sudden it was like, it's hard to remember now, but back in the day it was really revolutionary. There was only been a few broadcast networks, and here was something with a whole new visual style, whole new, it was all based on mood and emotion. There was no linear anything. And then we would go around, and they would take me to a bar. This guy from the radio station took us to a bar, and everybody in the bar was watching MTV on the screen like it was a baseball game or something. And I remember trembling and going, my God, it really works. It really works. So we would find out that wherever we were, our target audience, which were young music lovers, loved it. But no one else would carry us. The cable operators, who were monopolists then, there was no satellite TV then or internet, they wouldn't carry us. So we decided to rip off the old I Want My Mapo campaign and go over their heads and just go directly to our audience and have them call your cable company and say, I want my MTV, and demand it. And our audience had a lot of time on their hands. So the key was to get big rock stars to do it, so they'd sort of validate us. So we like Mick Jagger, Pete Townsend, David Bowie, and we made these commercials.
Tell us about getting David Bowie.
Well, we sort of divided it up. I drew the David Bowie card, which was great. He was one of my, he and the Beatles, those were the only 2 people I was really starstruck around. But I called his manager and said, we want to do this thing for MTV. I had met him once before and said, there was this thing called MTV coming, and could we use your photo? Like on a bill stuffer or something. And he said, is it good for music? I said, yeah, it's going to be 24 hours a day in people's living rooms. So I called his manager and said, well, David would like to do it, but he's in Stade, Switzerland, and he's skiing. And if you want to go all the way there, help yourself. So I said, okay. We got on a plane to Zurich, took a train through the Alps. I had a 35 millimeter crew. We met David. He was in his Let's Dance phase, clean cut, blonde, platinum blonde. He slim, good skier. He knew exactly what he wanted to do. He was going to ski down a slope, do a swoosh, say, I want my MTV. And then we would, in post-production, put a logo between his hands. So it was seamlessly easy. And at the end, he says, well, what are you doing, Tom? Do you want to go skiing? I said, yeah, I can go get skiing. And then at the end of the day, he says, would you like to come and take a sauna later? And I'm like, yeah, I can't believe this is happening to me. So we're like all staying in like some youth hostel kind of place, I go back, I say, hey, I'll see you losers later. I'm going to go take a sauna with David Bowie at the Grand Hotel, which was the Grand Dame Hotel of Stade. All the high society people went there. Of course, I didn't know that at the time, but I go there, meet him in the spa, take off our clothes, put on towels, go into the sauna, and there's only one other person in the sauna, and I kind of squint, and he's up on a shelf like in the back, and it's Paul McCartney. It's like, oh my God, I'm in the sauna of the stars here. Little Tommy Freston from Rowayton, Connecticut. How did I end up here? And that's one of my greatest stories.
It's a pretty great story.
You can leave now.
Well, as a massive music fan, I feel like your job had to have been just nirvana for you. So what was one of your best pinch me moments of, I cannot believe this is happening?
Well, it was great working there because you go to any concert you ever wanted, and once people knew that we were selling records, they just threw tickets our way. So one of the great things was Live 8, if you remember that. That was like a 15-hour show. They had a show in London at Wembley. They had a show in Philadelphia. And they got ABC to run like a 3-hour telescope version of it. And we said, we'll run it all. We'll run the whole thing. We got nothing else to do but play music videos. We'll take all 15 hours. And this is something that really upped our game and put us on the map because people saw us. That I had gone down there with a guy who worked with me, and we didn't have any credentials. The guy who had our credentials had disappeared, and there was no cell phones or anything. So we jumped the fence into the artist enclosure area, which is like the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. Bob Dylan, all these different, Santana, so on, the Beach Boys. And we ended up being on the stage for 15 hours. Well, pretty much the whole show, because we were we were just like they would say 20 feet from stardom, and that was something.
Okay, that was something. So as MTV grows, you now have other networks. You expand into VH1, Nickelodeon, Comedy Central. How do you maintain the entrepreneurial spirit that you had at MTV with your growth?
Well, it was always a challenge when you run a small creative company that's a bit eccentric, and you grow and you get bigger, and we've all seen it happen. People get more bureaucracy, bad people get hired, who in turn hire other bad people, and things kind of slow down. And I always believed in smaller groups, creative groups. I would put creative people in charge of each of our networks because I thought that would send a signal to the employees that creativity was our main aptitude. We were looking to always sort of break the rules, be on the edge. And, so small groups, really championing creativity and risk-taking and trying to keep them away from corporate politics at any level. And no one would come to work for us thinking they were going to work for Viacom, which was our parent public company. They wanted to work at MTV or Nickelodeon or whatever. So I tried to continue that fantasy.
Okay, so then MTV decides you have to do more than just show videos. So you develop tons of successful shows like The Real World, Beavis and Butthead, and South Park. Tell us how you discovered the South Park guys.
Everyone knows South Park? Have you seen the latest season? I keep thinking they're going to end up in El Salvador. Before they know it. Well, those guys, Matt Parker and Matt Stone and Trey Parker, who become good friends, they become billionaires, by the way. They started out as a couple of hippies, and they made this guy who was the head of programming for MTV. He said, I'm going to do a Christmas card this year. I'm going to do a video Christmas card. I met these young animators. They're really edgy. They're really cool. They have these little, circular comic book characters. And he made like an 8-minute Christmas card that this guy Brian Graydon would send out to all his friends. It was like, it was some stupid thing. And it was a big hit with everybody, and this guy, Doug Herzog, brought it in and said, look, I got this from Brian, and these guys look kind of interesting, so we played it. We said, well, that's good. We had started a channel called Comedy Central. In fact, it was a joint venture with HBO. In fact, my partner is right here. You don't have to raise your hand, Jeff, but we saw, it was like 30 seconds, yeah, we'll green light that. We had about 30 million subscribers at the time, and we're kind of stalled. So we said, we'll put you guys in business. We did a deal for 6 episodes. People went crazy for it. It went viral before everyone ever heard of anything going viral. I think we added like 30 million subscribers or something, because people would sign up for cable just to get this show. And now they're in their, I don't know, their 30th season or something, and they're both billionaires, They've done big deals, they've made movies, and from that little 6-minute Christmas card by 2 independent operators who were like out on the edge, they've created this, own little world for themselves.
Well, tell us how you decided to create Comedy Central.
Well, this involves Jeff too.
Yes, Jeff in the front row.
He's the fall guy in this story, but really.
That's why we put him in the front row.
I was having a staff meeting, and one day I get someone slips me in a slip of paper that says HBO, who were like the big gorillas of the business. I mean, they're announcing a comedy channel called, it's be on basic cable, like with advertisers and everything, not what they were doing at HBO. They were announcing a comedy channel called The Comedy Channel, and it was going to be a channel that would sort of rip scenes from movies and TV shows and some stand-up and stitch them all together, and they'd be introduced by, the equivalent of video jock VJs. And that's something we had tried and knew it didn't work. Anyway, they were announcing this, and it's like we were just scared, because these guys had a ton of money. They had connections in the comedy community. They knew, Robert Klein, Robin Williams. They had done George Carlin. They had this great heritage, and we're just these little bupkis cable, basic cable operators, network operators. So we decided, well, let's announce that we're doing a comedy channel. We had no business plan or anything, but we figured if we announced that we were also going to do one, we'd be in every story that ever ran on the launch of theirs. So that began. And so we said, well, just leak it. I called my boss, who was upstairs, who had worked at HBO and had been fired from there, and he always had, he was always happy to take a shot at this guy Michael Fuchs, who was then running HBO, he was the brainchild of this comedy channel. So we did that, and we said, well, we leaked it, and then we said we'd come up with a name in a couple of days. We'd send out a press release once we invented a name and what this thing was going to be about. So we call it the TV Comedy Network. It had a good logo. We were good at making logos. And it was going to be TV shows, much like we had Nick at Night. We would take old TV shows and package them. So there began like a 2-year war. We each spent like hundreds of millions of dollars buying programming, and finally it was a surrender, and we did a joint venture. Because none of the cable operators would carry either of us, because they knew if they carried one of us, they would annoy the other. And we were both worked ourselves into a spending frenzy. So we did a joint venture, which lasted a long time, and Jeff and I were both on the board, and we had started making it into a real business, a real network. It got a lot of cultural currency. We started The Daily Show. And then Time Warner, the parent company of HBO, was having a hard time. They had to do a sale. They had to sell some assets, so we bought the other half of it. And we had to say goodbye to Jeff, but it went on. Comedy Central went on to be, it's still there. I mean,
Well, the comics from Comedy Central, I mean, it's John Oliver, Jon Stewart, Amy Schumer. I mean, it goes on and on. Are you surprised of how relevant they still are today?
Bill Maher and Jimmy Kimmel.
Yes.
I mean, they all got their TV start, Amy Schumer, they all got their TV start on Comedy Central. We had a good ear and eye for upcoming talent. Now, a lot of them would graduate and go on to bigger gigs. I mean, Jimmy Kimmel, and I'm so proud of these guys. I mean, Bill Maher's been on HBO for, I don't know, 20 years now with his real-time show, but they're sort of the front line of resistance to the Trump administration. You know, we saw Jimmy Kimmel get thrown off the air, and Trump says he's going to get rid of the rest of them. They're all losers. But, you know, in the 60s and 70s, I remember in the anti-war movement and all that against Richard Nixon, it was musicians who were really the front line of resistance. You know, you can remember a lot of the music and the songs came from that. The musicians, except for Bruce Springsteen and Eminem, pretty silent these days. But it's these comedians, all of whom kind of graduated from us, who make up the backbone of sort of the public resistance to, in a very funny way.
So true.
They have a lot of material to work with.
Yes, and they're doing very well with it. Well, during these years, you still are able to indulge your wanderlust, and you go to Cuba, and you bring a gang of executives from Hollywood on this trip. Can you tell us about, and you meet Fidel?
Well, I was big on, in the 90s, the world began to open up internationally. You know, cable and satellite became widespread as governments deregulated, and they went from just having government-run channels, so Europe, Asia, South America, and I wanted MTV to be really the first true worldwide network. We did all that, and we had set up, we had, I don't know, several 100 million subscribers and 30 feeds in different languages. It was really fun, but there was one place we could never go, which was Cuba, because of the embargo and so forth. And they had, even after the Berlin Wall fell, the Soviet Union kind of forgot about Cuba, and it was their lifeline. And Castro said, you know, he was sort of like the last communist. And Cuba really went into a tailspin. But the music in Cuba had never been better. You know, when times are bad, the music gets good, and times are really bad there. So I wanted to go to Cuba and see if we could make some connections. We couldn't start a network there. So I arranged to do a trip there. I met this guy in LA, Jonathan Branstein. He had been there a bunch of times. He said, we can get visas, we can go. It was the era of the Buena Vista Social Club and all that. So I happened to tell this friend, Brian Grazer, who runs a production company and with Ron Howard in LA, that I was going. He said, oh, I want to go. And then he told somebody else who told somebody else who told somebody else. Everyone now wants to go to Cuba. I was just hoping to go down there and meet some people and get going. Now I have to take and basically be the tour guide for a whole bunch of really particular travelers to a communist country where I didn't know anything. But we go there, and we met a lot of music people. We had a nice time. We were there a few days, and at one point, we're meeting a minister of culture, and as we're leaving an afternoon meeting, he says, hey, do you guys want to meet Fidel? No, he called him the big man. You want to meet the big man? Yeah, we want to meet the big man. Of course, everyone's nodding their heads. So he said, well, he's speaking to a group of school teachers outside of Havana, so maybe tonight around midnight or 1 a.m. you could come to the palace. He famously kept all these hours. He'd speak for 3 or 4 hours at a time. So, and then they said, you know, the call's going to come from the big man, but it's going to come to a phone booth outside this bar. They brought us to a bar. People are like dry humping. It's all the communist elites. They're all getting boozed up and having a good time. They're playing disco music. People are dry humping on the wall and going, wow. Then he said, now the call has come, so we have to go out of the street to a payphone, because these guys they don't even use burner phones because they don't want anyone to know where Fidel is. So they use payphones. So we stand around the payphone and say, Fidel would like to see you tomorrow if you want to come for lunch. It's a little late now. So we show up for lunch next day, and he's at the presidential palace. He comes out to greet us. He's looking slim. He's like a man from history. You know, this guy we'd read about our whole life. He'd commanded every little aspect of his country. He's 6'3". He's there in his little green outfit, soldier boy. And I'm wondering, what's he going to say to us? We're like these sunburned gringos getting out of these old convertibles. Can't believe we're going to go meet Fidel Castro, who the America and gangsters had tried to kill any number of times. And he comes forward, and I'm thinking, what is he going to say? What's his opener? And he goes, which of you guys did The Sopranos? And there's this guy with this Brad Gray who produces Sopranos, and Brad's thinking, oh my God, he's got gangsteritis. He's going to probably have him take me out. So he says, that's my favorite show. That's my favorite show. He's like the only HBO subscriber in Cuba. And probably stealing it. So it turns into like a 5.5-hour lunch where he spoke for 5 of the hours. And he has a translator who's like a half a sentence behind him. And it was, at the end, he has, you ever go to a concert and, afterwards say, if you want to meet the band, come back, they can sign some CDs, and you could say, do a meet and greet with the band, and there's a little frenzy. So he wheels out these, this trolley. This is after we've been drinking all his booze. And a trolley with all his boxes of cigars, his favorite cigars, and he's autographed all of them. So we're fighting over those. Then he wheels out this guy who's from the Bronx, who's a communist, and he has a Bronx accent, and he's been Castro's photographer since the 50s. And he's got these big prints, and he's selling them, and we're buying them for like $100, and Fidel signs them. It was like this crazy scene. But I don't smoke cigars, but I have a bunch. I bought a humidor, and they're still in pretty good shape.
Okay, so you eventually become CEO of Viacom, and knowing Sumner Redstone's mercurial temperament, were you hesitant to take the job?
Yeah.
I would assume so.
It was like I was going to sign up for a death sentence. I loved this place. Everything I loved was in this job. I was close to creative people, animation, music. It was a fantastic job. But I knew if I took this job, it's like riding a bronco at a rodeo. How long can you stay on top before he's going to fire you? But, got to go for it, so I did. And I was sorry to leave my old job.
And then he was enraged, basically, that you didn't buy MySpace. That was
one of the things that pissed him off. But he didn't even know what MySpace was. He's like the guy with a fax machine. He didn't know much about the digital media or whatnot, but we thought that these social networks were like a paradigm shift in the media business. It was going to be the beginning of a breakdown of like this order we had all kind of prospered in, where people could, upload videos or join a social network and point-to-point communication. But anyway, we talked to Facebook, tried to buy them, made an offer to buy them when their revenue was $9 million. Mark Zuckerberg came in, he was 20 years old. We had about a month and a half negotiation period with that. He didn't want to sell to us, That was his big mistake. He didn't sell to us. And then we looked at YouTube, which we thought, well, they're like the short form people. They were like doing what, they were like, we were the kings of short form. And we looked at YouTube, and that was the first time, hard to remember, in 2005, anybody could upload video, any kind of video, comment on it, share it. And the traditional media companies all looked at it like it was a copyright infringement machine, pretty much. So we tried to buy it, but our board wasn't on board because they knew if we bought it, one, we'd be sued by everybody, and two, we probably couldn't afford to build the infrastructure under it that would run at a loss for so long, that would turn it into basically the huge monster. It's worth $600 billion today. I mean, it's bigger than Netflix. YouTube is like its own little world. But we couldn't do that. And then we looked at MySpace, and there was something about that. It kind of looked like it could be like a nightclub where, it doesn't cost you any money to get in. Maybe you're going to leave right away. There had been a predecessor thing called Friendster that had been a first social network that went out of business. So we were kind of diddling around with them and wondering whether to buy it or not. And then Rupert Murdoch pops in on a weekend. I happened to be in Hawaii with my family on a summer vacation. He just buys it for $560 million with no due diligence. And this, all of a sudden now he's on the cover of all these trade magazines as the digital visionary, which just enraged Sumner Redstone, the man with the fax machine. This guy, he hated Rupert Murdoch. And Rupert Murdoch was different because Rupert Murdoch actually would fly around the world and visit parts of his empire and actually see how they really worked. Sumner just was concerned about the stock price pretty much. So He was humiliated. He fired me, and the night he fired me, or night after, he went on Charlie Rose and said that I had the prize and I lost it. So I was out the door. But years later, Rupert sold it for $30 million. And, you know, it wasn't much of a successful acquisition.
And you should have gotten a thank you note.
I'm still waiting for the thank you note.
Okay, so you get fired. One of your first calls was Tom Cruise, because he had also been...
He had been fired by Sumner Redstone, and I had to point out to Sumner, you know, he doesn't work for us. Because he was disappointed in the performance of Mission Impossible 3. And he said, you know, his wife had told him he's jumping up and down on Oprah's couch. He's a Scientologist. He's going after Brooke Shields. Everybody hates him. You know, I hate him. You know, the movie should have done better. He's fired. And he said, you know, he doesn't work for us, first of all. Small detail. Anyway, you know, so Tom Cruise and I had something in common there for a while.
You did, and then your next call was Bono of U2, who calls you and says that he would love for you to be involved in his One and Red campaign, focusing on Africa, and you get involved, and you've been the board chair for over 18 years.
Well, I told him then, I said, you know, I only got fired like 18 hours ago. I'm not really signing up for anything. I had Steve Jobs call me, Bill Gates call me, all these people lobbying me to take this job, doing something I really didn't know anything about. I said, hey, man, I just got fired like 12 hours ago. Give me your break. But a few months later, he seduced me, and I did sign up to do that work, and it was work that I still do. I'm very passionate about dealing with extreme poverty and preventable disease in Africa. So it's been a rewarding sort of third chapter for me.
And tell us, why has it been so important to you? I mean, you've done such incredible work.
Well, in my in my early years, when I was in living and working in Asia, in India and Afghanistan, and I would go to Burma and places like that, I mean, it was like you'd see these nightmarish things. I mean, extreme poverty would just tear your heart out, and you'd see the injustice of it all. And you know, India now has a poverty rate of 2%. When I was there, it was 60%. But anyway, those images and the things I said, yeah, I get it. And Africa too, which is another continent that I really loved and enjoyed, was rife with a lot of things, one of which was poverty. So I signed up to do this work, and I told him I would only work for him for 3 months. I'd help him reorganize. He had 3 of these, what they call do-gooder organizations. The rest of the U2 band was not happy about this because Bono was spending a lot of time on it. So I kind of reorganized it and made some suggestions. And then he asked me to stay on as board chair. And meanwhile, I fell in love with the people who worked there. They were all, I always work like with young people, and these were young people, but they weren't in the entertainment business. They were like activists. And they really thought they could change the world and have an impact. So it was very rewarding.
And you also end up returning to Afghanistan to help start the first ever television network there, correct?
Yes, the first commercial television network. They had when the Russians took over, they had a television network. It wasn't much of anything, but I had met this guy when I was still at Viacom, named Saad Hosseini. This woman had tracked me down, who was an American woman of Persian descent. She had gone back to Afghanistan after the Taliban were toppled to start a clothing company. And then she found out, well, there's some dude from MTV had done this, decades earlier. So she tracked me down. We had lunch in New York. I was fascinated by her because the country still had a hold on me. I was still fascinated by it, and it's been always hard to get information. So she told me, well, I have a boyfriend. He's the Rupert Murdoch of Afghanistan, which is, whoa, okay. Anyway, he shows up, and he's this guy who his father had been a diplomat. He grew up in Japan, and then they got thrown out on the street after the revolution, and he ended up in Australia with his brothers, and everybody went to college, and then he went back, and they had after the Taliban fell, he got the first radio license for a commercial radio station. He got a $200,000 loan from USAID. They started a radio station. They didn't know anything about it, but it was like Good Morning Vietnam. It was like Good Morning Afghanistan. They would play music, which had been banned by the Taliban. And he would tell me these stories. He says, when we went on the air, like the whole country lit up. You could hear the music coming out of car windows. People were happy again. And then he got a chance to get a TV license. He said, well, I didn't know anything about radio, and I did about TV, so that's about the time he met me, and I was just fascinated. I would have him send me DVDs about shows they were doing. They had a show called Afghan Star. It was sort of like American Idol, where people would vote on music, and they have a big musical tradition there. Afghanistan used to be a wonderful place. It was very peaceful when I went there, and big music tradition. Anyway, he called me up, like after Bono called me, he said, Mr. Tom, you should come back to Afghanistan and you can help start up this TV network. We have the first major commercial television network. We had started 3 of them. One was an all-news network, and they had one for each major language group, Pashto and Farsi. And it became, independent media became all the mess that happened in the 20 years that we were there and spent $2 trillion for next to nothing. The media business was the biggest force for social change there. It was very successful in connecting Afghans to each other, to the outside world, sort of civilizing them and helping foster tolerance and gender equality and whatnot. And that was really, for me, it was invigorating. I brought in people I knew from India and Chile that I had worked with, and helped teach them systems, and it was sort of like starting at MTV all over again. But I was doing it back in Afghanistan. I was like, I had gone full circle. So I did that for like 12 years, 12, 13 years.
And were you able to accomplish what you had hoped?
Well, no. Well, we did accomplish a lot. We had a 70 share. Of all the 100 TV stations that started, we had a 70% market share. They actually had like ratings and everything. But then, the Taliban was after me. They put out a video about me, which wasn't good. And then they said I was a CIA agent in the 60s or 70s, which was all BS. And then the Taliban took over again. Just when I thought, we started a soccer league, because there was no heroes in the country, other than Mujahideen fighters. They really didn't have any sports stars or pop stars or anything. So we started a football league. We had like 6 or 7, 8 teams. I used to go to these games, and we had built a special stadium for them, and we broadcast them on television, and it was done out of shipping containers. And it was like slow-mo, all the things you'd see in an NFL game. We got these folks from Pakistan who really know how to produce sports. And then I would be there in the games, and I would in a new stadium, and I would look around and I go, wow, it's really happening. I mean, there's no way the Taliban can come back. They were never popular. Study after study would show that they never had more than a 20% approval rating. The only problem was the government had one about the same or lower, because they were allowed, with our acquiescence, to be sort of a predator, corrupt regime. So the Taliban came back. We all saw that, that horrible exit that we made, shameless exit.
And now, is the TV you have, the station still exists, though? But
yeah, we had to pare it back. The Taliban had banned television. They had banned music. They had banned radio. They banned everything. Playing chess, flying kites, you name it, you couldn't do it. You couldn't not shave, couldn't get haircuts. And we thought for sure they were going to come in and kill everybody at the TV station. I was gone at this point, because once they pointed me out, I decided better not to come back.
Good idea.
Good idea. But they let us stay on the air, and we moved the business model from being an advertiser-supported thing and doing entertainment and news programming to still doing some news programming, but doing educational programming for girls, because you got to remember the Taliban kind of erased gradually women from the public space of Afghanistan. Imagine if in a 20-year period you went to college, you went to law school, you became a lawyer, became a parliamentarian. Now you're not allowed to leave your home without your husband, who maybe got killed or wounded in one of the many wars that had happened. Just an awful thing. So we started doing educational programming and making the episodes in Kabul. And we had a bunch of Afghan educators in the diaspora and within Afghanistan, and we probably made 1,200 episodes by now, but it's in subjects like science or mathematics that are non-ideological. We've gone from 1,100 employees to 400. We've gone from 260 advertisers to 1. And we get money now from Gates Foundation and Malala Foundation, operations like that, and it does really well. So we're encouraged to keep people employed, to try and get information out and some kind of hope to girls. And by the way, the one advertiser that's left is like a Red Bull type of product, an energy drink. They have no alcohol there, and everyone's just going around overly caffeinated, so.
Well, that's not so bad. Well, looking back, how do you think your non-traditional path influenced your legacy?
Well, in a good way, because I'm a big fan of people traveling young and getting out in the world, and I would travel kind of close to the ground, and what I learned was humility. I mean, I tell you, if you go to the India in the 70s, if you got nothing else out of it, you certainly learned humility in the face of this unbelievable crush of people. And you learn confidence in yourself to be able to move around and do things. And, risk-taking becomes sort of endemic, and hustling and improvising, and, trying to have a sense of humor about things. So there was a lot of things that I learned at a low level, starting really when I was just hitchhiking around the world almost, that really came in handy as attributes. And to run a kind of media company that I ended up running, which was sort of eccentrically organized and creatively driven and filled with different kind of characters, which I have been used to all of that. They became attributes that came in really handy in running the beast. And we were up every quarter for 17 years. 4 times a year we were up, as they say on Wall Street, double digits on the bottom and top line.
And I love how you hired people in the book, you'll read this, there was like an Indian smuggler, I think he was, that you put in charge of MTV India at some point, because...
No, he was a smuggler in Morocco.
Okay, so sorry. But he was a smuggler, he gave him a major job.
He knew he was a clever guy.
Exactly.
He could get stuff done in a place that was just a morass of restrictions and bureaucracy. He'd get stuff done.
And I think from your travels, that's what you gained that helped you so much, I think, throughout your career.
Yeah. Dealing with outsized characters. And anyone who was in the entertainment business, Jeff can attest to that, like in that period, there was a lot of, one of the attractions for people to go in that business, there was a lot of funny, unusual, egomaniacal people that might have been hard to tolerate, but they really had they had a certain brilliance about them. A lot of that's gone now out of the entertainment business. It's been a bit homogenized, I'd say. But in those days, it was sort of wild and fun, particularly in the cable space. When it was growing like that, you could tolerate a certain amount of risk and loss and take a lot of chances that people may not want to do today in the face of all the data they have to deal with.
Right.
That now comes their way.
Well, I'm sure you get asked this all the time, but what advice would you give to young people today that maybe don't want to follow a traditional path, but are scared to go outside of the box?
Well, let's say you get out of college, you've been in school or graduate school, you've been in school for 12, 16, 18 years. My advice would be take a beat. The greatest, when you're young, you can take risks. And to think when you get out of college and know what you're going to do and tie yourself into something, you might be a bit premature. And, I would think hard about what are you curious about? How do you want to live? Don't think you can't jump off the conveyor belt and take a risk, particularly when you're young. No one's going to miss you. Go out and travel and see the world. You come back, you'll seem to be a more interesting person and more thoughtful by someone who may want to hire you than someone who just got out of school and stayed on the conveyor belt in a traditional way. So I just like risk takers. It isn't that much of a risk when you're young. I know it may sound hard. You can't just do that. You got to have some way to make money or have money. But there's nothing wrong with doing menial jobs and thinking you don't have to go right to work for Goldman Sachs.
He has given this advice to my son, and I shut it down. But I hear you. For other people.
All your children should leave the country immediately.
Okay, I want to open it up. I know you guys probably have questions for Tom, so.
You can raise your hand. Thank you for everything that you have shared with us. Really terrific. I wanted to ask you a bit about the current state of the entertainment industry, if I might. Recently, you gave an interview. You were participating in a podcast with the infamous Matthew Belloni, and or Bellany, and you said that there was an inexorable, I think was the word you used, march towards consolidation, and we see that today with the recent announcements about Paramount. What is that going to do to our culture? What is that going to do to independent creators? Where do you think we're heading?
Well, I don't think it's a good thing. I don't think there's anything about bigness that enhances creativity. I remember when we started MTV, there were 40 record companies, 40, and a lot of them were run by entrepreneurs, and they weren't subject to quarterly earnings goals, and they would run things pretty much based on their taste and so forth. And it was a lot more interesting. Music was a lot more vibrant. But now there is this inexorable force to consolidate. I mean, if you just look at the Hollywood environment, you had Disney take out the Fox studio. Now you've got the Ellisons taking over Paramount, which on one hand I said, well, that's good, because they like movies, they know how to make them. David Ellison does, and that's a good thing. And they have money. The alternatives for Paramount were grim. They were in such a bad state, they would have had to sell to some private equity company to come in and just strip the place down and sell it for parts. Not a good ending. And now they've taken over, the world's second richest man's taken over, his father was the second richest man. They want to take over Warner Brothers. You know, of all the studios in the history of Hollywood, that's got the biggest aura around it, the greatest library, the greatest history. And it's going to be gobbled up by a billionaire. And, jobs will be lost. They'll make a lot of promises. They're going to suck a lot of more costs out. They have to fire thousands of people and save $1 billion or $2 billion. And I don't see how we really benefit from that, talking as a viewer. It isn't like people can't exist around the fringes. I mean, there's companies now in the movie business like A24 or Neon who still are, but they'll probably get gobbled up too. It's just, I don't know how you stop it. And that's not to say everything's going to just disappear, because you still can come out of nowhere. I mean, look at Netflix, look at YouTube. But these companies get so big, they're hard to dislodge. And we had a great thing going in the cable heyday. And then all the cable powers that be kind of got, it was hard for them to morph into the digital world. And maybe something's going to happen to the digital world. Well, yeah, it is, AI. AI is coming, and they're talking about replacing, a large part of the population of everyone. And they're hoovering up all this intellectual property, to use the word, the IP, hoovering it up and doing it without paying properly for it, which was the same thing the digital companies once did to the legacy media companies. They would just take stuff and ask for permission later, and then eventually there's it gets worked out. But I'm happy to not have to worry about it too much. That's my answer. It's not a happy story. I mean, you're going to have sons of billionaires running a large part of our entertainment complex. Lachlan Murdoch and David Ellison. And if Ellison were to buy Warner Brothers, think about it, he's going to control CBS News, CNN, and TikTok. And, imagine where that goes.
Tom, hi. I read the book in like 3 days. It was amazing. And I want to go on a lighter note. I laughed out loud at least 3 times or 4, because there's some great stories in there. I listened to it. And you always do. I think you're right with your travel and your confidence and your ability to get in and out of situations. It's because you were in the world and you met so many people. But there's 2 stories that I thought were amazing. I don't know if you want to pick one, but the Timbuktu story with Jimmy Buffett is just probably the craziest story ever. And then the South Korea story. I don't know.
What one?
North Korea story with the pictures and you almost got arrested on the boat.
Oh, getting
You
arrested.
want me to tell it?
I love that you're a fan.
Oh my God, the
Buy
greatest
this book.
stories ever.
I was just going to say, I kind of want everyone to buy the book.
Everybody should buy the
Story.
book. It is one of the best books I ever listened to, and I'll read.
I
when
totally
buy it.
agree with you.
So tell me which of those two stories you think.
Okay,
are-
so we got getting busted in Saigon,
Yeah.
and the other one was Timbuktu. Well, the Timbuktu one, I hate to give it away. It's sort
Might
of
be
like
too long. Might be too long.
All right. Okay, so when when television started to break in Asia, it started. There was this guy named Li Kai-shing, a Chinese billionaire from Hong Kong. He started this thing called Star TV, and he had 5 signals, and he had the satellite. It would go all the way from Saudi Arabia all the way, to Taiwan. And he picked BBC and a couple of Cantonese movie channels, and they picked MTV. So we had a thing called MTV Asia. And it was phenomenal for us because you just have a satellite dish and you get it. You didn't have to sign up for anything. So we were in Hong Kong and talking with the Star TV people. I was with 4 of my fellow workers, and I see this thing in the paper that Vietnam has just opened up for tourism, and you can get a visa on arrival in Ho Chi Minh City. So I said, hey, we got a weekend here. Why don't we all go we'd be the first tourists in Vietnam. Let's go. Let's go to Vietnam. And no one really was dying to go, but I said, come on. This is a real chance. We didn't go for the war. We can go for the peace. And we fly to Saigon, and the airport's all built. Everything's still kind of run down and beat up. You could see in Tan Son Nhut Airport where a lot of the shelling had been, and we checked in the hotel, and we go out at that night, and everyone's on a bicycle. There's no cars, really. And we walk down this street, and then we see this place. It's called Apocalypse Now. It's a bar. And out of the windows coming it's like the whole Vietnam songbook, Creedence and Creedence Clearwater and Tina Turner and the Rolling Stones. And you're thinking, well, what's going on in there? And this guy with me says, you think Marlon Brando's in there? I don't know, let's go in. And we go in, we sit down, and meanwhile there's just street people selling old cigarette lighters and stuff made out of beer cans, and we smell some pot. They're smoking pot. And I said, wow, the Doors and marijuana, the 2 things we kind of liked about Vietnam. So we buy some pot and we get stoned in the bar, and then we drink some beer and we go on a bar crawl. It's really fantastic. And we tell people we're with MTV, and they kind of remember because some people have it on the satellite dish. So I wake up the next morning with a terrible hangover. And I'm imagining the opening scene of Apocalypse Now with Captain Willard. If you saw, he's down. He wakes up in a hotel room in Saigon, and he's breaking mirrors and everything. And I said, well, I wasn't quite that bad. I said, we're going to go on a mission. So I went down to the river and found some boat. I said, I'm going to get a mission. We'll get a couple 6-packs of beer, and we're going to go up the river. So I go back and wake everybody up. So we're going to take a trip up the river, and we're getting this old rundown quasi motor yacht, and we start cruising up the river, and it's all jungly, and it's like right out of Apocalypse Now. And then I'm taking pictures, and I take a picture of this little boat, and there's these soldiers in the back playing cards. I didn't know they were soldiers, and all of a sudden they turn on, they got a siren, they come chasing us, and here we are now. We're getting chased by a police boat on the Saigon River, and they arrest us, and they take us to an island. And the guy who's the captain of our boat, he only knows one word in English, which is jail, jail, jail. And he's going, jail, jail, we're all going to go to jail. So they huddle us together, and they were the first Americans they've seen since the war's over, pretty much. And this looks bad. And I'm thinking, oh my God, Vinny, my buddy, he's got all these reefers on him, and maybe the pot's not that legal. This is going to be like the Midnight Express. We're going to be, so then they figured I was sort of the ringleader, and I bought a phrase, a Japanese, a guide to Vietnamese guidebook in Hong Kong, an old one, and I pieced together a couple of sentences, and I came back and I said, in Vietnamese, I said, my name is Tom and I am sorry, and they love that. And then I repeated it. That's the only Vietnamese I knew. My name is Tom, and I am sorry. And I got points for showing up. And then Vinny takes out his business card and he says, I said, MTV. We're with MTV, not spies. We're with MTV. And they had seen MTV. You know, and these soldiers are living in some dormitory in the river with a satellite dish. And they said, oh, my God, this is fantastic. These guys are from MTV. So all of a sudden, there's no jail. We're giving each other 5 high signs, taking pictures, and they let us go. All because of that little square logo and on the business card and my confession. So that's a story. I won't tell the Timbuktu story. You have to buy the book for that.
We have one final question, and then we'll get to the book signing.
It's less of a question, and maybe you'll find this interesting or not. I worked at MTV, and I may have been one of the people that received the call when you guys were there in Asia, because I worked with Vinny and Tom Hunter. And I started as an intern in '88, working for Mark Booth in London. And then I worked in New York for the next 10 years. But I just wanted to say it was the most fun place to work. Every story you've told or people tell was true, and then some. But you were truly this icon that walked amongst us and was really fun. Like you didn't, I remember when Sumner would come around and we'd all have a laugh at his dirty jackets. But like you were really this guy that would come around and everyone would, the sea would part, and we were all your friends and your people. And it was, you were truly a wonderful sort of guy at the top, and it was the most fun and the best experience of my life.
Thank you. I'm going well up here. That's good. Well, it was a special place, a special time. When I run it, we have this great alumni association. People everywhere. They all stay in touch. And they have these high-powered jobs all over the entertainment business. And when I would see someone, hey man, I used to work for you. And I go, yeah, what was it like? He says, best job I ever had. And I'd say the same thing back.
Love that. Cheers.
Thank you, Tom.
Thank you so much, Tom.
Oh, okay. Thank you, Holly.